Well, good morning, everyone. And again, it's always a pleasure to meet everyone here, have our audience present. Today is Webinar Wednesday. We are navigating and understanding your taxes. But before we get started, I want to make sure that I'm able to inform you all about Buy Local Grow SA. See, Buy Local Grow SA is a one-stop website of resources as well as information for small businesses. Now, Sabrina's going to make that change right now so you can see. We've got a QR code that if you're tech savvy, you can hover over with your camera and go into that direction. But Buy Local Grow SA is a platform designed for business owners like yourself. And through the website, you're going to be able to access free resources ranging from procurement opportunities to promoting your businesses, as well as increased visibility for free. And we all love that word for free, because it gives us a range from resources, like I said, from promoting your opportunities for promoting your business as far as posting business opportunities in your profile. You're also able to have sales or introduce a new product. And then you can use Buy Local Grow SA as another avenue to be able to advertise your services and products. Now, we also have some other procurement opportunities where you can save the ones that you're interested in, along with the opportunity to post contract opportunities that you yourself have. Now, it takes about 5 minutes to register. And once you're registered and you receive the approval, you literally unlock a whole new way of doing business here in San Antonio. But you're not just here listening to about what we have to offer. Now, everyone knows that we've been doing 8 weeks of winners who have registered at Buy Local Grow SA. Now, this week's winner, and I believe this is our final winner for the week. So our winner is Carrie Von Louden. Carrie, welcome. She is the owner of welcome. She's the owner of Institute of Makeup Artists and FX of San Antonio. Carrie, yes. Congratulations. Thank you for being our winner. Yay! Lovely. So tell me about Institute of Makeup Artists and Special Effects. I'm assuming that's what it is.
Yes, it's special effects like SFX. The school started about 7 years ago, and I've been teaching for about 15, and it goes over beauty, it goes over the fundamentals of beauty, it goes over advanced techniques, and then we have a wonderful instructor. Her name is Jojo Delgado, who is the lead artist for the 13th floor, and she comes in and teaches special effects. So it's really exciting, and we got new kits in. New starter kits, which is about $400 of makeup that the student gets. So we're really excited.
Well, congratulations. And as our audience and participants are able to see, if you're ever interested about learning about FX or just kind of learn some new techniques, reach out to this week's winner, Carrie Von Louden. You see her contact information. And again, it's always such a pleasure being able to see our local business owners, such as Carrie, join us, get registered, and continue to work with other entrepreneurs here in San Antonio.
Juanita, may I just interject?
Absolutely.
We also are really excited. We're going to open the school up to the public on the weekends, because makeup artists, I want makeup artists and hairstylists not to be scared to go into other people's homes because of the COVID scare. This is going to be a safe place for them to be able to go in and do their craft in a safe, sanitized environment.
Absolutely. Well, and
so
thank you,
really
because
excited.
I love the fact that you're following the recommendations and the requirements to ensure the safety with our social distancing. Once again, thank you for joining us, and thank you for allowing us to honor you as a local entrepreneur.
Very excited.
Absolutely. Now, not only do we say thank you to, entrepreneurs such as Carrie, but we also want to say thank you to who, Sabrina? The people who are constantly there supporting us. We want to say thank you to our sponsors who help us, who make this possible, such as HEB, the City of San Antonio, their Economic Development Department, Wells Fargo, and as you can see, the numerous supporters such as the Chambers of Commerce and the Development. However, you're not here just to hear me introduce all these great people and what they're doing. you want to know who the subject matter for this week is, right? Our subject matter expert is James Shiveley. He's a CPA. Now, James has over 11 years of combined experience in public accounting, finance, internal audits across the manufacturing, distribution, oil and gas industries. James is currently a board member of the San Antonio chapter of the IIA and was previously the vice president of professional development and board member for the Long Island charter of IIA. Now, his current management role at LPSM, James is responsible for the development of approaches to robotic processes automation, which is RPA. Wow. Okay, so I just realized what that meant. And of assurance services, as well as further development of firm methodology for various engagement types, and is the practicing leader for internal control advisory services. James is a certified public accountant, a certified internal auditor, and a certified information systems auditor. Talk about being able to manage at multiple levels, James. Welcome, and tell me how we're going to move forward, especially during this tax season.
Wow, that was quite an introduction, and I appreciate that. I hope I can live up to the wonderful picture you painted of my experience. So if you'll bear with me, I'll start sharing my screen, and we'll talk a little bit about taxes and some hot topics that are currently applicable. So,
you know, James, as you get ready to share your screen, here's the one thing is, you get people say hot topics on taxes. You know, we're getting ready for the end of that fiscal year, and a lot of these corporations, a lot of these small businesses have to think in that manner. So to me, it is a hot topic being an entrepreneur. So help me count them correctly, make sure I report it correctly. What are we going to learn today?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about, well, first we're going to start the conversation with a discussion of just some of the basics, the fundamentals of accounting, and why it's important to have an accounting system in place. And that, as I'm sure you're aware, and many of your small business owners that have started their entrepreneurial journey are aware, is important for them to be successful during their year-end process and the preparation of their tax returns that they're filing with the IRS. Now, I know that there's a lot of different deadlines, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through the presentation, what some of those different deadlines are. But the one that just passed was September 15th, and that was for a lot of the pass-through entities, and we'll talk about what those are as we get to the end of the presentation today. And the one that's coming up is going to be our 1040 filers and corporations, C Corps. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about that as we proceed through the presentation today. So with that said, I have my contact information here on the screen now, and I'm happy to take questions if you have something that you're not comfortable sharing as we go through the presentation today, but I welcome you to use the question and answer functionality as we go, and I have that on the screen off to my left here, and I'm able to see as that comes in. And I'll be monitoring that and try to work in responses to your questions as we go. If I'm not able to work, if I'm not able to work in a response to your question for the presentation, I'll either take that and provide a response to our moderators for them to send along to you at the conclusion of our session, or you can email me, and I'm happy to take the time to respond to you via email afterwards. Now, there's one slide that I'm going to read verbatim to you, and this hopefully is the only one that I read verbatim to you today, but I'm doing that because it's important.
And we as business owners understand that.
That's that we are not advising you to take or not take any particular course of action until and unless you have formally engaged our firm for a specified scope of work. We have conducted our engagement in accordance with our relevant professional standards. The information contained herein is general in nature and is not intended to address the circumstances of any specific individual or entity. Although we strive to provide accurate and timely information, there can be no guarantee that such information is accurate as of the date it is received, or that it will continue to be accurate in the future. No one should act on any such information without appropriate professional advice and a thorough examination of the facts and circumstances of their situation. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk about our agenda.
Ready.
All right, so first I'm going to start with just a little bit of an introduction and background, why we're here today. And we've talked a little bit about that so far, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. Then we're going to proceed into just a discussion of accounting and the importance of having an accounting system in place and what that gives you. I'll have a section where I talk about how to close your books at the end of the year and some of the challenges that we see a lot of our clients experience in practice. And then we'll look at what an example tax checklist looks like, how you can find more detailed ones, and then we'll explore some of the effects of your entity type choice that you make as a business owner, and what that means for you from a tax perspective, because that's important. After that, I'm just going to have a section where we talk about some of the recent tax changes, and this is part of the reason that our disclaimer is important because tax law is changing all the time. You monitor the news and you hear about the House and the Senate negotiating new tax packages or relief packages, and all of those contain tax provisions. And one of those that we'll focus on today is the CARES Act, because that had a lot of stuff in it. And we'll talk about what that means for you as a small business owner and some of the opportunities to tax plan. And what that means is structure your operations in a certain way to realize benefits that are available to you in the legislation that was passed. So that brings us to our introduction. And so first, I just want to talk about an accounting system, and that's just it's the way that you record the activity of your business and prepare for year end and understand the operations of your company. Your accounting system is what records the activity and the financial information that you need to understand how your organization is performing. So throughout today's presentation, I'm going to talk about some of the concepts that are important to understanding the information being presented to you by your accounting system, all the way through the development of your tax liability. And as we go, I'm going to sprinkle in examples from our practice that we've seen our clients experience that are related to some of the situations that we are talking about in that specific section.
Okay.
Again, as we come to the end of each section, I'm going to make sure I take the opportunity to answer any questions that I see that are in queue in the Q&A function. And so first, what is accounting? And these are just the two definitions we pulled directly off Wikipedia. The links are there at the bottom, the source of this. But accounting is broader than bookkeeping. A business owner probably, or some small business owners, thinking about accounting as just the activity of processing transactions into their bookkeeping system on a day-to-day basis. And really, that's much more narrow than what accounting or accountancy is. Accountancy is the broader process of communicating, processing, and understanding information about economic entities. And the concept of bookkeeping and the father of modern accountancy was really back in 1494, an individual named Luca Pacioli published a work called Summa de Arithmetica. I'm sure I butchered the pronunciation of that, but that book was the foundations of modern accountancy as we know it today. That work introduced the concept of double entry bookkeeping. And what is that? Double entry bookkeeping is the system by which we logically record activity into our general ledger through balanced journal entries, where we process transactions that have debits and credits that equal each other. We'll look at debits and credits and those journal entries in a little bit more detail on the next slide. But bookkeeping is just conceptually the recording of that activity, and accounting is presenting that information in a way that allows us to understand the nature of economic entities' operations. So I mentioned that double entry bookkeeping is used to maintain our books and records. That brings us to what is the accounting equation. And this might look familiar to some of you. And the accounting equation is your assets are equal to your liabilities plus your owner's equity. What is that? Your assets are things that you own. Liabilities are what you owe. And your owner's equity is the capital that you've contributed to the company plus your retained earnings. Now, those balances are recorded in your general ledger system. Many of you might be familiar with something like QuickBooks if you're a small company, or Xero is another popular online general ledger package. But larger organizations that might be beyond a couple $1 million in revenue could be using something a little bit different. There's things like SAP Business One or Microsoft Dynamics or Microsoft AX that are great examples of software packages for companies that are in the, let's say, $10 to $50 million of revenue range. Those are very good. Now, those software packages record activity into general ledger accounts. Those are represented by, those are called T accounts on the bottom of the screen, that your balanced journal entries that you process in double entry bookkeeping record activity into. We use those because that process of recording those two-sided entries makes it very difficult to inaccurately record something or misrepresent the activity that's going on. Those double-sided entries make us record, when we received cash, what happened for us to receive that cash. Well, we made a sale, we recorded revenue. That's the concept behind that, is it keeps us honest. Now, those accounting packages that I mentioned, there's some different ones that folks use as the size of their organization changes. Why is that you might have differing needs depending on the size of your company? That's that a smaller organization package like QuickBooks is great for a small company. It's fantastic. It's easy to use, very user-friendly. You're able to easily get in, get started, and begin recording the information that you need as a business owner to understand your business up to a point. As you become a larger and more complex company, your needs are going to change, and you're going to have to, in some cases, begin complying with new or different accounting standards for how you record and disclose your activity. An example of that is how you recognize revenue in certain situations. And this applies to maybe a company that has long-term construction projects. They're dealt with very different from the sale of an individual product or service.
James?
And yes.
Do we have a baseline when we start identifying when we need to kind of migrate from QuickBooks to maybe another system? Because this two-sided accounting makes sense, especially as an entrepreneur. But do we have a baseline that we maybe need to start evaluating because we are growing and we are moving from, and we all want to hear this, from one tax bracket to the next? Are there baselines that we need to kind of make that evaluation?
I'm going to say that it's not so much related to, it's not related to your tax bracket, of course, but think about, I would encourage anybody that's listening to think about the complexity of their organization and the complexity of their individual circumstances, right? So every company is going to be a little bit different. You can get to be a very large organization that still has relatively simple revenue streams if you're just buying and selling product, for example. At some point, though, when you begin to think about, is this a company that is going to begin having something like publicly traded debt or publicly traded shares even? I have a number of clients that are considering the IPO process.
Right.
Some of them began that journey on a system like QuickBooks. And today they're looking at their operations and saying, this doesn't meet our needs anymore because we're not able to do some of the things that are expected of us from a process maturity standpoint as a soon-to-be public company. And they're looking at different solutions that are beyond that QuickBooks system. So it's a evaluation that everybody has to do for themselves. And when they begin being asked for things like reviewed financial statements, audited financial statements, if they ever have to file SEC filings in the Edgar system, if they are if they've made like a shelf registration for issuing shares, then it's probably time to take a long, hard look at what they're doing in their back office and say, is this still the right solution for me? Because you might be getting by, but it might be time to look at what does the future really look like for this company 3 or 5 years down the road, and begin making that change. Because I would caution anybody listening that it's not really an overnight proposition, or shouldn't be, to make sure that things go smoothly.
Now,
does that answer the question?
It does. Now, you just mentioned IPO and SEC.
Yes.
Now IPO is...
Okay, that's the initial public offering. It's the process that a company undergoes to sell shares of the company to the public. That is a process they engage in with an investment bank who markets those shares to the public. And then if you watch CNBC or MSNBC or financial news media like that, companies that are going through that process will be publicized on channels like CNBC, and you'll usually see them ringing the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange on the day that they become a publicly traded company.
And I'm excited to get to that point.
Yes, and I mentioned IPO, and SEC is the Securities and Exchange Commission, and they are a government organization that regulates public companies that have publicly traded debt or equity.
Now, one of the questions we already have a question, and thank you very much for bringing that to our attention as we get ready to move to the second slide, because you said accrual versus cash basis, but I think Maurice has a question about, due to COVID, right? Due to COVID, let me go back to it because I want to make sure I get it correctly. He says, let's go back up. He says about his home business. Maurice, I want to make sure I get the right question. Let me go to it. I'm going to the question. I apologize. For some reason, I can't find it. It says, due to COVID, thank you so much, Sabrina, due to COVID and working from home orders as mandated by the governor's office or as a business owner, are we able to claim the home office deduction for 2020?
Oh, that's a great question. To my knowledge, there's been no changes to the home office deduction in any of the legislation this year that I'm aware of. I didn't see it in any of the materials I reviewed specifically for the preparation of this webinar. That should be, to my knowledge, that should be available to you. The portion of your house that was utilized in the execution of your business should be able to be calculated and used in that home office deduction. I'd caution the asker of the question that the home office deduction is typically a high-risk audit item. The IRS uses a scoring system to score the tax returns that they receive and assign them a risk rating. The home office deduction is regarded to be one that's higher risk, and it puts you at a greater risk of being audited. But as long as you've done everything appropriately, you have nothing to worry about, of course. But that would be something that is available to you if your home office is being utilized in your business.
James, I'm assuming, Maurice, and please clarify that this question is stemming from the fact that you probably had a brick and mortar and now you had to transfer it into a home office. And as he's gathering his thoughts, I know one of the questions that we were, as I'm saying before, is the accrual versus the cash basis. and I'm really looking forward to this slide, because I don't think I sometimes understand, at least my business partner is superb about this, on how this actually is applied towards.
Yeah. Yeah. So just on the home office deduction, just one more word on that. While you're operating out of your house, it's unlikely that you're using 100% of your house for your business. You're using part of that to live. So I would not deduct all of that. I know that something was mentioned in there that just think about what's being used in that deduction, and just, of course, comply with the letter and spirit of the law, and you're going to be fine. Now, moving on to accrual versus cash basis. When you're recording those transactions into your general ledger and preparing for the end of the year and the preparation of your financial statements to use in your tax return, well, the question is, how are you recording that? And that's called the basis of accounting that you're using. And on the screen now, you're seeing the accrual versus cash basis of accounting. So probably the two most common that are talked about. There's others that are out there, including tax basis. Some people keep their books just on the tax basis of accounting. Otherwise, you're going to be processing some adjustments to change your accrual or cash books into a tax basis for filing your tax returns. And then there's some other comprehensive bases of accounting, such as an insurance company would use something that's regulated by like the state insurance regulator has a specific set of accounting standards that apply to them. But some of the fundamental differences between these two most common bases of accounting are the timing of when revenues and expenses are recognized. In the cash basis of accounting, that's appropriate for many small businesses to use, is you record revenues when they're received and expenses when they're paid. That's not allowed for larger organizations, especially organizations that are getting to the point where they're ready to go public or have to issue what are called generally accepted accounting principles financial statements. GAAP is the acronym that you see at the bottom of the screen there. Your bank may ask you for a set of reviewed financial statements from an accountant, and we would prepare those on a GAAP basis.
Okay.
Accrual basis is what's allowed under GAAP, and in accrual basis accounting, the timing difference is that revenues and expenses are matched to where we recognize revenues and expenses when they are earned or incurred. So, for example, I buy inventory from a vendor, and I buy inventory, I bring it into my warehouse, and I put it on the shelf, and I've paid cash for that inventory. Maybe I paid a lot of cash. It's something, a very expensive piece of machinery. It's $10,000 or $100,000, and I put it on a shelf over there. I don't have an expense yet. I haven't sold that to anybody, or I haven't used it in my business. It's just inventory. It's over there sitting on the shelf. When I go and I sell that machine to an end customer, I have a nice markup. I sell for $150,000 or so, and it goes out to that customer. At that point, I record my revenue, what I sold it for, the $150,000, and my expense. I take that machine out of inventory and I expense it at that point in time. And that's like that timing difference is the difference really between accrual and cash basis. Another difference that you might have in accrual and cash basis is simply, let's say a customer comes into my store under cash basis, and they contract for me to deliver something to them in a couple of weeks, and I sell that to them on account. Like they have an account payable to me. I have an account receivable from them, and I deliver that machine, and I record the expense when I deliver it, but I don't have revenue until they've paid me. You don't really have accounts receivable or accounts payable in cash basis. You're not able to recognize those. So that's kind of some of the differences there, and that difference in timing allows for you to time the recognition of revenues or the recognition of expenses and kind of game year-end figures, and that's part of the reason it's not allowed for larger organizations.
Now, I know this is probably a question on everyone's mind, because I know it's constantly on mine, is what about our financial statements? How do we put all of this into something that I can actually take a look at and work with. What do they look like? What should they look like? Oh, there you go.
That actually brings us to our next slide. So that's a very timely question. And on the screen now is a example balance sheet and income statement. There's really three financial statements, three primary financial statements that your business owner is going to be looking at. And that's the balance sheet, the income statement, and the statement of cash flows. The balance sheet is what shows you the total of the assets and liabilities and owner's equity that you've recorded. And the balances in these accounts carry over from year to year. It's like a permanent record of those things that your business owns or owes. On a yearly basis, your business will have an income statement, and that income statement reflects the revenues and expenses that the company has recognized over the period. At the end of the year, net income on the income statement will close out and be added to the owner's equity section of your balance sheet. That will then carry forward year to year from there. So these are very simplistic, and these were taken from an example in another presentation I gave, and it's just a 1 month example of a balance sheet and income statement. Now, this is the balance sheet and income statement. The next is the statement of cash flows. And what this one does is allow the business owner to understand and reconcile for themselves the differences or the sources and uses of cash that have occurred in their business, starting with net income. We then add and subtract the increases or decreases in our assets and liabilities and record them in the respective section of whether it was an operating activity, investing activity, or financing activity. An operating activity is conceptually the things that we do in order to produce revenue. So I have to buy inventory in this example in order to then sell it and produce net income for myself. Investing activities is typically the purchase of new buildings, new vehicles, or equipment and machinery that's used in my business process. And then financing activities, those are the things that I do. I might be interacting with a banker or contributing capital of my own, the business. And that helps me understand how my bank balance, my cash balance, has changed over the period for those different sources and uses of cash. What's not presented here is the last section of a set of financial statements, which are the notes or the disclosures in the financial statements. And the disclosures in the financial statements, there's a set of them that will accompany any GAAP financial statement that we'll talk about quite a number of things. We have a checklist that we go through with our clients. It's about 10 pages long to tick off all the different disclosures that we might have to make. It's information that is provided to the reader of those financial statements so that they can fully understand the operations of that business and what the balances mean on those financial statements. It's really just a discussion of those balances and what makes them up. I think you had a question, Juanita?
Yes. No, you saw the expression 10 pages, and I'm thinking only 10 pages, but I'm sure those 10 pages is well.
That's the short version.
And I'm only laughing because that short version is a wealth of knowledge, and I would really value, because I'm sure you spend a enormous amount of time making sure we understand those terminologies, because in looking in the financial statement, you're showing that it was a balance sheet, and then there was a slight change, and you said this is the statement of cash flow, and I see the difference, but a lot of the time it gets overlooked. And then your final statement where you said, the notes, where is the disclosures and all the attachments and the acknowledgments accompanied with an explanation of, of wealth of vocabulary and statements and regulations. Wow. I mean, that's a summary of information that is very valuable to me right now, because as you saw the expression, I was completely like, and you're telling me it's the short version.
Yes. So that checklist, that was the short version, of course, and it's actually very quick for most organizations, because the standards that we derived that checklist from. They're voluminous, and they're written to apply or have language in them that applies to any conceivable business entity. And every business is different, right? And they're not going to have to make disclosures that aren't related to their activity, right? A retailer, a distribution company, or a technology company, all are going to have a very different set of disclosures, and that would focus in our attention in different areas in that disclosure checklist. There are some that might be applicable to everybody. In the notes, we would always talk about the company's business operations, just some high-level description of what the company does. That would apply to everybody. But as you go further down, what that company talks about in the notes to their financial statements is going to be very different and a very limited subset of that disclosure checklist. It's just there to prompt the professional that's preparing those financial statements to make sure they don't miss anything.
So what's important about this concept? Because making sure that me as a business owner really understands what is the focal point of the concept that you're presenting. What is the meat and potatoes, for a new business owner?
So what's in it for me, why this is important, is the process of preparing these financial statements is important because the reading and understanding of the summary of your operations presented by the financial statements is what's going to allow you as a business owner to communicate with the stakeholders in your business, right? So on a day-to-day basis, you might have interactions with your accountants, bankers, lawyers, your business partners, taxing authorities. All of them have an interest in understanding your business operations, and your financial statements are what tell them about that. I know that we're focused on taxes today, and we're going to be talking about taxes really just in the next couple of slides here, but I'm reminded of me and my wife. We watch a show called Shark Tank. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, right? Great, fantastic. Then you're familiar with on the panel, Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful, so to speak. I think is his name, and the concept of the show, and of course it's sensationalized for TV, but a business owner walks in and they start getting grilled about like their sales, their net income, the amounts invested by other investors, how much debt they owe, the rates on it, their margins, and this barrage of questions. And I'm thinking about Kevin because he's very binary when it comes to that business owner's response. When they have the answers, they get a pretty positive reaction. He's very engaged and willing to continue the conversation with them, especially when it's the information he wants to hear. The margins are great. He loves that. But they get a strong negative reaction, on the other hand, when they're not able to talk about it. Now, like I said, this is sensationalized for TV, but we also see this in our day-to-day as CPAs, as accountants. Our clients go have conversations with bankers and investors, and when they're not ready for that conversation or able to talk about their business or their business plan, or communicate that this is a growing business with fantastic margins and show that in financial statements, it's a very challenging conversation sometimes. I mean, it's not like a TV show, but it certainly does occur in real life. And so that's wanted to root that really into those two sort of situations that I've seen, one on TV, but two also in practice. Now, that brings us into
exactly.
That brings us into.
I'm ready to hear it.
What do we do with it? What does our year end and year end look like in our taxes and preparing for those? So, part of preparing for filing your tax returns is closing the books at the end of the year. And on the screen here is shown a very summarized closing process. And I know that I'm showing that this takes about 5 days. And I'm positive we've got some folks that are looking at this and saying, you're out of your mind. Because I know that I have clients that I had a couple clients this year that didn't close their books until July. So that's 7 months instead of 5 days. But fundamentally, there's not that much that goes into closing the books for a year. And so those activities are shown here on the screen, and pre-close, it's preparing and processing some of those closing transactions, recording the activity in the various general ledger accounts. And the first couple of days after the end of the period, doing the account reconciliations. It's very important to do a bank rec, make sure all of the activity that's processed through the bank has been reported into the general ledger. Doing some of the various closing entries that are required, like recording depreciation or reserving or writing off aged accounts receivables or payables, and then some other necessary adjusting journal entries. Like I have a few clients that have, at the end of the year, negative cash in the bank in their main operating account general ledger, and changing that to a liability is an example of a closing entry that might be prepared there. Then preparing draft financial statements, reviewing those with a financial professional, maybe that you have on staff. A lot of folks have a controller or an accounting manager or something like that. They'll review those with. Soft close, post any final adjustments, and then issue the financial statements. That can all be done in a week or two. Now, why is this important? Really is that I kind of see this as one of a huge pitfall for a lot of small business owners. And why is that? Is that not staying on top of this process and closing their books for a period that just finished, whether that's a quarter or a year, it delays their ability to understand their operations, whether that was a profitable year, whether or not they met loan covenants or had the financial wherewithal to take on projects or opportunities that were presented to them. I had a client this year, a utilities client. They do a lot of construction work and constructing like power lines, sewer lines, etc. They had an opportunity to bid on a couple of very large projects, $1 million+ of construction work. But in order to do that, they had to work with an insurance company to secure a certain level of insurance for that job. Insurance company asked them for the financial statements. Bids were due in June, and it was the end of May, and they had they hadn't closed their books. They weren't ready to give the company financial statements. Wow. And they ended up missing out on the ability to bid for that contract. Simply, the root cause of that was they hadn't finished closing their books for the prior year. It's really sad. That was something they were fully qualified to bid on, and may have even won. Had a good chance of winning, at least in everybody's estimation of it. And that's a tremendous opportunity that was missed. And I know that plays out everywhere across the economy, really, where some opportunities get missed just because the back office wasn't taken care of like it should have been. And that's why this is important here. So I think maybe talking a little bit more about some of those key activities that go into that, try to demystify things a little bit. And what are some of those? And I mentioned closing AR and AP, and that's just recording the invoices and billings into the appropriate period. And then I know that there's folks that don't receive invoices from their vendors, maybe in a timely manner. And so accruing an estimate, if you expect a material expense from them. What that means is if I expect that I'm going to get billed by a vendor for some material that I received or services that I received from them this month, record an estimate into accounts payable as a reversing entry. And then when I get the actual bill, record the bill later. But that lets me close the books in a fairly accurate, materially correct represented version of how my activities were for that period and move on. Bank reconciliation is important. I mentioned that. This is part of the process that allows you to get your activity recorded into the bank account GL and allocated out to the various expenses or revenues or reductions in accounts payable or receivable that activity applies to. And then those other closing entries. I have a couple of acronyms on here: AR, E&O, and depreciation. E&O is something that might be applicable to a manufacturing company. That's excess and obsolescence. That's for inventory that you have that you no longer expect to be able to sell. Like it's not the most current version, or you'd have to significantly discount it. You end up writing it off through that process. Okay. And then just having a sort of monthly or quarterly review process in place with a financial professional to spot trouble early is probably valuable as part of the closing activities.
I do have a question, James.
Yeah.
I'm seeing on here the bank reconciliation. I know that's extremely important, However, how often should that activity take place?
My opinion is it should happen every month.
Okay.
I know in practice, I have a number of clients that do that anywhere from on a monthly basis to about once a year.
Okay.
And everybody's answer is going to be different. I think on a monthly basis is probably the right answer for the majority of businesses.
Okay. Understandable.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. So now we've closed the books, and that gets us into starts getting us into taxes. And I think I'm going to have to speed up a little bit. I know I see the time. I've got 15 minutes left, but this is important, and I want to spend a little bit of time here. So what you have that you're seeing on screen is an estimate of what your tax liability might be depending on your entity choice. And when you're forming your business, you made choices whether or not to do that as a sole proprietor, a partnership. You might have formed an LLP or an LLC, or maybe even a C Corp. Now, your choices are going to drive how much you owe in taxes. And what this table is meant to do, it's showing you the taxes that you might have to pay with a company that has about $135,000 of net income. So their revenues minus their expenses is about $135,000. And under each of these different entity tax types, you're going to be taxed a little bit differently. Now, the first four can be very similar. They're pass-through taxation, and they're all going to experience the self-employment tax rate, which is 15.3% plus income tax rate, and that's going to result in about $44,600 tax on that entity. The fifth entry on that table is S Corp. An S Corp is an election that you make with the IRS. You file a form. Now, I apologize if I get this form number wrong, but I think that's 2558, I believe, that you file with the IRS. And you file that when you're like an LLC can elect to be taxed as an S corporation by filing that form. And when you are taxed as an S corporation, they act a lot like a partnership or a normal pass-through entity, but the S corp has to pay the owner a salary. And the standard for what that salary needs to be is it's something called the reasonable salary standard, and it's open to judgment. And what that means is, what would you have to pay somebody to do this job for you? And that salary that you have to pay yourself, that is the portion that's subject to employment taxes. And so that's an area that opens up the opportunity for tax savings. You see that on the table, is that S Corp for the same net income is paying about $6,000 less in tax. That's great savings. That's more money in your pocket. I'd caution that the S Corp, you cannot take distributions out of the S Corp until you've paid yourself the salary. And that's an opportunity that a business owner has to get into some trouble with the IRS, is that you must pay yourself a salary first before you can take distributions on a tax-free basis in the S Corp. And finally, the C Corp, the last one on that table, it's subject to something that's called double taxation. They have to pay tax at the C Corp level. They have to pay tax again on the dividends that are distributed to the owner. The owner receives a salary, and employment taxes are paid on that salary as well. This results in the C Corp paying the most tax of the bunch. This used to be a larger variance between C Corps and individual taxation until the tax rate was lowered in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, and I think that was 2018. Lowered the top corporate tax rate to 21% from it was at 39% or 35%. I apologize. And that lowering of that tax rate brought that much more in line with individual taxation.
Now, I'm all excited about this table, but what's my checklist? Because I want to make sure. Now I'm terrified because I have to have a double tax at the C Corp. Now I'm the other. But in reality, I really shouldn't, because there's tools out there that help me stay organized.
Yes. So when you work with a tax professional, they're going to give you a tax checklist or a request list or a document list that they need from you at the end of the year. There's a couple versions that we have, and tax professionals typically contract for updated listings that they need to request from document providers. Like our firm contracts with a company called CCH, which is a Thomson Reuters company that provides us a lot of the checklists that we need so that we don't have to spend time preparing those ourselves. Now, our short version tax organizer has like 20 to 30 requests on it, depending on if you're a LLC versus a C Corp. It's just the different documents that we ask for. And some of those example documents are on the screen here. This covers the big areas that we'll ask about. There's other miscellaneous things like your incorporation documents we'll ask for the first year and then carry them forward forever. They have a long form version that's not presented here, and it has 400 request items. That rarely gets used, but it's there and it's available. Now, I can't share with you the checklist that I use in practice because of the intellectual property license, the agreement that we signed on to have that given to us. That doesn't mean it's not available out there and very easy to find, right? So you can go into Google, or this is, I think this is from Bing, keep the pitchforks and torches to yourself. I know I used Bing, but you can just Google tax organizer. And you'll come up, and these examples that are on the screen currently are the exact tax organizers that we use. I'm just not sharing them with you directly, so I'm not violating my agreement, but it's out there and it's available, and you can see the exact document that we're going to ask you for very easily. I'd look for ones that are branded as either AICPA, a CCH is a great one, and there's some other big names out there, but both of those are top-notch, in my opinion. You can find them very quickly. And you can replace 1120 with 1065. If you're a pass-through organization, you'll get the same thing.
Well, I want to comment on how professional that is because, one, yes, maintaining your confidentiality and your agreement, but the fact that you endorse other, organizers that are able to provide that information. So kudos to you on that. But everybody's going to make mistakes, right? What are some of the most common mistakes? Thank you so much.
All right. So I think these are probably 4 of some of the most common mistakes that we see. Either underpaying or not paying quarterly estimates. That can result in some penalties. The formula for that is calculated on Form 2210. It changes every year, and it depends on the amount that you underpaid. But typically, you want to be paying either 100% of prior year's tax liability or 90% of your expected current year liability. Those are the 2 safe harbor amounts. Otherwise, you go to this form and calculate your penalty, and it's based on an interest rate benchmark that changes year to year on that form. Now, this year's benchmark is very low. I think it's 3.5% multiplied by the amount that you underpaid and the amount of time it was outstanding. So it's not significant for a lot of people, but it's there, and you can avoid it very easily by filing on time. The late filing or failure to file penalty is more significant. It's 5% of the unpaid tax, and it's a minimum penalty of $435. That 5% is charged on a monthly basis, up to a maximum of 25% of the unpaid tax. And then the other one I want to call out really is the not depositing employment taxes timely. Everybody has a different schedule for how often they have to deposit employment taxes, and that is given to them by the IRS, and that schedule changes based on the size of your organization. The penalties for not depositing vary depending on how late the payment is, but it's up to 15% of the amount owed plus interest. And that can be very significant. You're aware that that's the employer's portion is, what is that, 7 and change percent. And salaries are what they are. They're very high, and that can add up. So that can be a very large penalty, and you can avoid it by depositing that on time. You're withholding it anyways. Where some folks get into trouble is dipping into that piggy bank before it's deposited and using that for something else, and then they don't have it to deposit when the time comes. So the way to mitigate these is to file and pay on a timely basis, and that lets you mitigate the continued accrual of penalties and interest. It's not going to get better by not filing it. You've got to go ahead and do it. And then there are some of these penalties that can be waived for a legitimate reason. Now, I mentioned that payroll tax deposit schedule. When the IRS changes your deposit schedule and maybe you miss a few deposits because they increased your frequency because you're becoming a larger organization, the first time you miss that, you can have a conversation with them and say, yeah, this is why that happened, and they'll waive the penalties. We've seen that in practice as well. That's common for that to happen, for folks not to keep up with the first couple new deposits on the new schedule, and those penalties can get waived just by keeping an open dialogue and working with them.
Okay.
Now,
James,
yes.
This is great topics. I want to be able to touch the current trends and hot topics. We're getting close to the end. I want to make sure that I open it up to our audience. If you have any questions, type them in. This is some great information. The changes are coming, but right now I want to be able to get refocused. If there's anyone out there that wants to ask James some questions, please take the opportunity right now. This is a wealth of information. We have so much more information that we want to be able to present, but really understanding what James has presented was very valuable. If you want to have additional information, type in your email. Sabrina will be more than happy to take your email to be able to provide you any information if you have additional questions. At this time, is there anyone who's out there that has a question about what James has presented so far? Because, understanding that there's a short version of items, did not know that. And then there's an extensive one, did not know that either. And that's why we have these subject matter experts here. I open it up right now. Any questions? Well, let me start with this one, James, as we get ready to go into it. And I'm looking at some of this. What is one of the most frequently asked questions when you're doing small business? What is one of them?
Yes, so I would say that one of the most frequent questions is, we get asked commonly, what do you need in order to prepare taxes for us, and how much is that going to cost? We always get asked, what does it cost to prepare the tax return? What do you need in order to prepare it? We covered that a little bit with the tax checklist. Now, how much does it cost? Every firm is going to be a little bit different, but as a pretty universal truth, CPA firms tend to charge by the hour of work. So the more complicated you are, the more complicated your operations are, and the less organized you are when it comes to the end of the year, can drive up the cost of doing your tax return. Hourly rates for CPAs vary. I would say in San Antonio, we've seen most firms are somewhere between, call it $100 to $200 per hour on their work, which it can add up, right? If you take a full day, that can easily be over $1,000 at those rates. And if it takes longer than that, that can be much more. I can tell you that our firm has rates that are in that range. We assign an individual rate and a rate to each individual depending on their level of experience. And our rates for doing a tax return, we have a minimum that we charge at $2,500. That's about what you'll see in practice with a lot of folks. And that's probably the first and most common question that we get is how much does it cost? Then after that, for business owners, we start getting asked, what are some of the savings ways that we can save on our taxes? That's a very common question as well. And that's what a lot of the content that we have on these slides is. I would say that probably currently, I would pay attention to things like the payroll tax deferral, the employment retention tax credit, which is available to companies that had to close due to COVID, or had a 50% decline in revenue. If you had a 50% decline in revenue but kept folks on board, make sure that you are asking about this credit when it comes time to prepare taxes. or file your payroll tax, because this can be taken against the payroll taxes you have to file.
Right.
That's worth up to $5,000 per employee. That's money back in your pocket. You need to be aware of that and taking advantage of that. The other big one on here is the modification to the net operating loss and the carryback rules. There's probably a lot of companies that have realized operating losses this year, and you have the ability to carry back these losses for 5 years. And that's important because that puts you into a window where your corporate income tax was higher. It was 35% up to 2018, and you can take the losses that you have this year back and get about 15% more for them on tax years where you might have been more profitable. So this is a great tax planning opportunity that's available to you. You should be asking about it. Anybody that has losses this year needs to make sure that they're taking advantage of them. I think this is not available forever, so keep an eye on it and try to take advantage of it to the extent that you can. That's probably that just speaks to one of the questions that we typically get asked is, how can I pay less or pay only? It's really pay only what I owe, but only what you owe is a complex question to answer based on all the different things you have to consider to get there.
James, wealth of knowledge. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time, because this takes a lot of detail. And
Juanita, I think we lost you. You might be on mute.
James, we have one last question. I think we lost Juanita, but I want to make sure we answer this question because it's really important.
James,
and it's coming from Maurice, and it says, what
are the deciding factors for a small business in selecting a CPA versus a bookkeeper?
That's a fantastic question. And the answer is going to be, what are your long-term goals for your business? If you are at a size and have steady state operations that aren't changing dramatically and you're not intending to grow, then you're not going to need very significant or involved professional advice. And a bookkeeper is probably the right answer in that scenario. You need somebody that's going to be able to quickly and at a moderate cost record your activity and give you the information you need to, on a year-to-year basis, administer your business. Okay. If you are intending to grow your business, engage in new lines of business, work with other professionals that need to understand the financial position of your company through GAAP financial statements, then a CPA is probably the answer. Or it's at least definitely worth considering at that point. So I understand that the cost is significant, and so it's not a decision to be taken lightly. When you make that decision that you need a CPA, I would strongly encourage anybody listening to talk to multiple CPAs, because it's going to be a very, let's say, close and personal relationship. I'm going to be my clients, I'm talking to them regularly, and we have to be able to work together and have that sort of genial back and forth relationship that enables us to be effective when it comes time to present that business to the other stakeholders in it. So it depends a little bit on the business and what their goals are. And I think that when you decide that it's time to grow and formalize your business, that it's probably at that point that you're going to need some outside help until you get to the point where you've hired your own back office staff and maybe have CPAs working for you.
Of course. James, thank you. Wealth of knowledge.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. And thank you for taking the time, because some of the questions, that came to mind were very valuable. And the fact that you share some of those frequently asked. We applaud your expertise and great information, just as our audience is saying, great information. We look forward to having you again, because I'm sure as laws change and tax season is coming, we're going to have other questions. So we welcome the opportunity to be able to have you back at a future time.
I'd be happy to come back. It's been my pleasure.
Absolutely. But like always, we talk about supporting. You've got that subject matter expert such as, James, who is here presenting on, year end and taxes. But when you take a look at locally, you've got San Antonio, you got Buy Local, Grow SA. And James, I think you're going to hand over the screen control over to Sabrina at this time. And she's going to provide us some of the information about our Buy Local, Grow SA, because we want to make sure that you're always staying connected to professionals such as James and his expertise. But take the opportunity to register for Buy Local, Grow SA, because again, it's a one-stop website of resources for small business owners such as yourselves. Take your phone, take the full opportunity of hover over the QR code and register. It takes you about 5 to 10 minutes. And again, once you gain that approval, you open a whole new way of doing business here in San Antonio, because we want to make sure we offer that support. Now, we're talking about support. We have a great business locally. It's a corporate company with a homegrown feeling. That's HEB. And HEB, again, comes up and steps up to the plate for 2020 HEB Opportunity Exchange. How do you do business with HEB? How do you create that framework of economic impact? Well, September the 28th, between 8:30 and 2, register. You're going to get a personalized link. Don't share that because it's created just for you. Register at Buy Local, Grow SA, that you're able to receive those links, but then also take the opportunity of being able to see that link here on your screen. But HEB takes that one step. They always take that one step further, because they're always looking on how to move you to that next level. The next level is they want you to produce a video. Sabrina, show me that link right now. There you go. They have a video expo, 2020 HEB Opportunity Exchange. They've asked our community to be able to do a video about your business. You're going to record a 90-second max video containing the following information, such as the company name, information about your product or service, where your product is located, whether it's a website, storefront, contact information. Now, it has to be recorded, not in YouTube, max 90 seconds. Now, today's the deadline. You can still make it. Submit the deadline to the email that's listed below. The subject title needs to be 2020 Opportunity Exchange Expo. Name of the company, name of the product. Get ready, set, like they said, go. But don't take off too far, because we want to make sure that you stay in contact with us, because we're getting ready to do it in Spanish version. But here's the other thing too, is the Maestro Center always being the forward thinking. We want to make sure you call, find out what we're doing here locally. We're learning, we're accelerating, and we're developing. Take the time, call, schedule some time to come and see what space kind of fits for you. And if you happen to miss the opportunity to be on this, be a participant in this webinar or even live, follow us on Facebook. I know I'm asking you to like me. Yes, not just me, but the Maestro Entrepreneur Center, Instagram, Twitter. And for you professionals who utilize LinkedIn, follow us also on LinkedIn. The Maestro Center has YouTube. But again, even though we have this webinar, sometimes your busy schedule does not allow you to participate. No problems. Go to our website, because we've converted them into podcasts. We want to make sure that you see the 7 platforms that you have before you so that you can interact with them. And it's always about supporting you, making sure that the entrepreneur, whether you're small or you're at a corporate level, that you're able to interact with your neighbors in the community as well as with the Maestro Center. But here's the other thing too, is we need to say thank you. Thank you to those sponsors that we have that make this all possible. Again, HEB, the City of San Antonio Economic Development Department, Wells Fargo, and above all, as you see, all the chambers and supporters. Don't go away, because we're going to be doing it in Spanish. Give us about 2-3 minutes, and we're going to present to you en español. Dame un momento. Bienvenidos a todos a Webinar Wednesday. Hoy vamos a presentar en la importancia de comprender tus impuestos. Pero antes de comenzar, quiero informarles sobre la información que se presenta aquí en Webinar Wednesday. Vamos a ver sobre Buy Local, Grow SA. Quiero informarlos cómo va a presentar Sabrina la información on Buy Local, Grow SA. En un momento. Ahí está. Estamos listos. La información sobre Buy Local Grow SA es un sitio web de recursos para pequeñas empresas como Buy Local Grow SA. Es una plataforma designada para dueños como ustedes. A través del sitio web pueden accesar recursos gratis para poder presentar oportunidades de adecuación y también para promociones de sus negocios y aumentar y presentar visibilidad gratis. También tenemos algunos mejores características nuevos para ser posible de presentar sus promociones públicas de comerciales, ¿verdad? Pero también en su perfil, a que cuando reciben y hacemos sus ventas o presentaciones de sus nuevos productos o servicios, también pueden usar Buy Local Grow SA como presentarse sus servicios o productos. Pero también también agregamos oportunidades de adecuaciones donde pueden guardar las que les interesen, juntos con la posibilidad de hacer publicar sus oportunidades de presentar sus contratos. Solamente le toman como 5 minutos para registrarse. Pero cuando reciben la prueba, pueden desbloquear una nueva manera de hacer negocios aquí en San Antonio. Pero también se acuerdan que estamos presentando ganadores cuando se registran con Buy Local Grow SA. Esta semana, Vanessa, ¿quién es la ganadora? Estoy notando que es Carrie Van Louden. Y vamos a presentar, Vanessa,
Sí,
nos va a ayudar a presentar la persona que ganó esta semana.
muchas felicidades, Carrie Van Louden. Ganó, es parte del Institute of Makeup and Effects of San Antonio. Nos da mucho gusto presentarla y voy a darle un momento a ver si quiere comunicarse con nosotros y hablar con nosotros un momento. Carrie, would you like to share any information? Any information about your business? Are you still on?
No se preocupen porque Vanessa tenemos presentación e información, ¿verdad?
Sí, entonces nos da mucho gusto que Carrie ha ganado. Yo sé que habló de tener sus clases de maquillaje durante las fines de semana, entonces favor de buscarla en Facebook o Instagram para ver su negocio. Muchas felicidades, Carrie, y nos da mucho gusto que ganaste esta semana.
Pero vamos a dar gracias, como siempre, para poder a dar gracias a nuestros patrocinadores que ayudan a hacer eso todo posible. A H-E-B, la ciudad de San Antonio, el Departamento de Desarrollo Económico, a Wells Fargo y a todo lo que los apoya, que están presentados aquí, las cooperaciones. Pero también lo que quiero informarles es, ya sé que ustedes no están aquí para escuchar la información que yo estoy presentando. Ustedes quieren escuchar quién nos va a presentar información sobre poder entender nuestros impuestos, ¿verdad? Y va a presentar ahorita Sabrina, a James Shiveley. Es un CPA. James tiene más de 11 años de experiencia combinada en contadora pública, financieras y actuadoras internal en industrias de fabricación, distribución, petróleo y gas. James es un miembro de la Junta de Capital de San Antonio de IIA y anteriormente fue un vice president de desarrollo profesional y miembro de la Junta de Capítulo de la Long Island de IIA. Su función actual es de gestión de LPSM. James tiene responsabilidad de desarrollo de enfocarse para automación robóticos de procesos. Una oportunidad, gracias. Y los servicios de asuntos y como desarrollo adictamente de metas de firmas para Esto no conozco. Oh, también de tipos de comparación y la lidera de práctica de los servicios de agregamiento de control interno. James, tantas certificaciones de contador público y también Auditor Interno Certificado y Auditor de Sistemas de Información Certificado. ¿Cómo se dice? Se recibió con tantos certificaciones que estoy lista para que me enseñe a entender mis impuestos, porque en este momento necesito entender ya que viene el final del año para mis negocios.
Muchísimas,
Estoy lista para aprender lo que nos va a presentar James. Gracias.
muchísimas gracias, Juanita, y gracias al señor James Shiveley por estar con nosotros. Hoy algunas veces voy a cambiar en inglés si tengo alguna pregunta porque nos presentó mucha información y él es el experto en esto. Entonces, lo primero que mencionó y como vamos a hablar hoy son los temas de actualidad sobre sistemas contables e impuestos. Entonces, esto es por qué es importante hacer esto y por qué tenemos que pensar en esto todo el año para estar listos para preparar al final del año nuestros impuestos y estar, tener todo para las fechas, al plazo, lo que es necesario para hacer los formularios que es específico a su negocio. Entonces, por ejemplo, si es en inglés como el 1040 formulario o si su negocio es otro tipo. Entonces, usted tiene que investigar o saber cuál es el tipo de negocio que usted tiene y cómo puedes prepararse y cuáles formularios van a necesitar para hacer eso. Okay, next slide, please. Y como siempre, los presentadores que vienen a Maestros nos comparten su información. Entonces, puedes usted escribir o tomar una foto de la información ahorita de James Shiveley y él está listo para hablar con usted y comunicarse con usted para cualquier pregunta que usted tiene. O también puede usted preguntar en nuestro chat o comunicarse con Maestro y nosotros nos podemos comunicar con el señor James Shiveley. Entonces, eso es una manera de contactarse con él y también saber su negocio. Next slide, please. Entonces, es muy importante, tengo que leer esto porque es como ley, y para usted que entender que esto es una presentación que no es aplicable a todos, entonces voy a leerlo palabra por palabra, entonces lo siento. No le recomendamos que tome o no tome ningún curso de acción en particular hasta que haya usted contratado formalmente a nuestra firma para un alcance específico de trabajo y hayamos llevado a cabo nuestro compromiso de acuerdo con nuestros estándares profesionales relevantes. La información contenida en este documento es de la naturaleza general y no tiene la intención de abordar las circunstancias de ninguna persona o entidad específica. Aunque nos esforzamos por brindar información precisa y oportuna, no podemos garantizar que dicha información sea precisa en la fecha en que se reciba o que seguirá siendo precisa en el futuro. Nadie debe actuar sobre la base de dicha información sin el asesoramiento profesional adecuado y un examen exhaustivo de los hechos y circunstancias de su situación. Ok, cambia. Next slide, please. Entonces, siempre me gusta una agenda para saber lo que voy a aprender, ¿verdad? Entonces, vamos a aprender de la introducción y antecedentes de los impuestos, por qué estamos aquí, la importancia de un sistema contable, el fin de año y impuestos básicos, cerrando los libros, la lista de verificación de impuestos, efectos de la elección de la entidad y la tema de actualidad sobre impuestos con el ley CARES Act. Y esto es importante porque siempre está cambiando, Congreso siempre está cambiando, entonces, y los beneficios que usted tiene ahorita, es importante saberlos y actuar en este momento para poder tener esas ventajas. Next slide, please. Entonces, la introducción es qué es la contabilidad. Entonces, aquí nos dice que es una forma de tener información, un sistema para que usted puede preparar todo el año para el fin del año. Y es algo fundamental para saber cómo los impuestos va a afectar a su negocio, cómo está designado, ¿verdad? Entonces, tienen que maximizar el valor y pensar en lo que estamos hablando, y hoy vamos a presentar los conceptos básicos de eso y presentar unos herramientas financieras para que usted puede determinar lo que usted necesita hacer para mantener su obligación tributaria a su negocio y para saber cómo su negocio está haciendo. Entonces, todo eso para decir cómo está haciendo mi negocio, qué tengo que hacer, cuáles procedimientos y normas tengo que hacer, y que cada empresa es diferente en su estructura y tengo que aprender lo que aplica a mí. Ok, next slide, please. Entonces, el sistema contable es cómo se hace. Este es el proceso, el fuente de información oportuna para tomar esas decisiones. Okay, next slide. Y aquí otra vez está hablando de por qué y cómo, ¿verdad? Hay una diferencia entre la contabilidad de los libros y la contabilidad en general. Entonces, lo primero es pensar es que la contabilidad es la medición y el proceso, como el procesamiento de comunicación financiera y cómo entender la economía y cómo su empresa trabaja en ese sistema. Y cuando estás manteniendo sus libros o la contabilidad de los libros, es de pensar en ese proceso de cómo vas a mantener mis gastos, mis ingresos y como yo digo, los números, ¿verdad? Cómo voy a hacer trabajar lo que estoy gastando y cómo lo estoy gastando. Tenemos que estudiar y saber cuál es lo que es nuestro sistema para analizar, pero los libros de contabilidad es mantenerlo. Next slide, please. Entonces, esto es la ecuación de contabilidad. Entonces, esto es algo que muchos negocios estamos pensando, ¿verdad? Los bienes y cómo es igual a lo pasivo, agregando el patrónimo de los propietarios. Entonces, esto es explicar cómo sus cuentas y lo que estás gastando y lo que estás recibiendo para tener los ingresos, ¿verdad? Entonces, estaba hablando el señor, click please, haz clic. Entonces, los bienes es lo que usted tiene y lo pasivo es lo que usted debe y el patrónimo, me cambió. El patrónimo de los propietarios es el capital y las ganancias retenidas. Entonces, todo esto es como tomando una foto de su negocio, ¿verdad? Entonces, lo que usted tiene que pensar es, todo esto es manteniendo mi libro. Algunos de ustedes podrán usar QuickBooks o un sistema que se llama Xero. And Mr. James, I'm sorry, it's hard for me to
Shiveley?
Shiveley. Could you tell me more about the soft dynamics for the larger companies?
Yes, of course. So two of the larger software packages that we see our clients use once they get past about $10 million in revenue is Microsoft Dynamics or Microsoft AX and SAP Business One are two of the common ones that we see in practice. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir, and I'm going to translate. Entonces, el señor Shiveley nos dice que cuando usted ya ha llegado al punto que estás ganando 1 millón o más, entonces vas a tener que cambiar su sistema de QuickBooks o Xero, si eso es lo que estás usando. Y mencionó Microsoft. Can you say the application's name again, sir? I don't want to get them wrong.
Oh, of course. Microsoft Dynamics, Microsoft AX, and SAP Business One.
Entonces, esas son las aplicaciones que si usted está ganando tanto dinero, que vas a tener que cambiar. Y nos explicó que hay una diferencia entre eso, QuickBooks, por ejemplo, o Microsoft, ¿verdad? En AX, creo. Entonces, es una manera de que usted podrá mantener sus libros y sus cuentas. Y en QuickBooks vas a ver la doble contabilidad para mantener y sea honesto en sus libros y mantener que todo está seguro, ¿verdad? Entonces tienes que marcar lo que estás gastando y lo que estás ganando para no, y tenerlo doble contabilidad evita fraude, evita que problemas con sus libros y tienes que calificarlos para que sus libros sean paralelos y que tienes esas mismas operaciones registradas en cada sistema para tener ese equilibrio, ¿verdad? No quieres gastar tanto que usted no tiene dinero en su cuenta, entonces es importante mantener esos números, ¿verdad? Esas finanzas. Y el Señor nos dice que cuando usted tiene que avanzar y comprar uno de esos sistemas que mencionó, vas a tener más información para cumplir con esos estándares de conteo para su negocio. Y es muy, y vamos a hablar un poco más de eso porque hay una diferencia entre cómo vas a mantener sus libros con un negocio pequeño o un negocio que está ganando más dinero, ¿verdad?
Pero, Vanessa, ¿qué es el base que hace de la decisión para tomar sobre QuickBooks o Xero o mantener otro sistema como Microsoft o SAP One? Porque cuando hacemos esa decisión, vamos a determinar qué es la base para hacer ese tipo de decisión.
Sí, y nos dijo, y yo sé que una manera, y no sé si se me olvidó otra manera, pero es el tamaño de su negocio y también, dos cosas, y también cuánto estás ganando. Si usted está ganando más como de 1 millón o 10 millones de dólares, entonces usted va a tener que invertir en un sistema que puede ser más complejo. Y también si usted tiene muchos empleados, también podrá ser otra razón. No sé si tenemos que preguntar al señor Shiveley por otra razón, si se me olvidó uno.
Mr. Shiveley, did you have any other examples of what is a good baseline to identify QuickBook versus, another system?
As far as when to think about making the switch, that would be, it depends on the business, and when the business becomes larger and has more complex transactions and or is regularly required to file financial statements with a bank or another entity like the Securities and Exchange Commission that have to be on a GAAP basis or generally accepted accounting principle basis. That's probably the time that the company should begin looking at a more advanced general ledger package than QuickBooks or Xero. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Entonces, el señor Shiveley mencionó si está más complejo sus transacciones y como sus productos y sus servicios, y usted tendrá que hacer sus formularios y reportar más a su banco o al gobierno. Ahí voy a hablar ahorita de con quién vas a reportar. En eso vas a tener que tener un sistema que puede hacer eso en esos momentos entre el año, no solamente al final del año, porque muchas veces yo sé que yo pienso, todo se puede esperar hasta el final del año, pero si usted está ganando tanto o si su negocio es tan complejo, vas a tener que hacerlo a las etapas necesarias para su organización y eso cambia con cada negocio. Can you change the slide, please? Entonces, esto es una manera para pensar en esa transición, ¿verdad? Entonces, viendo el devengo y versus el base de efectivo. Entonces, el base de cómo que estás acumulando su dinero en su compañía y cómo lo estás gastando, ¿verdad? Entonces, vas a ver que si su sistema es... si su sistema es algo que es una diferencia del tiempo, usted está ganando, si usted es un negocio pequeño, vas a tener su ingreso cuando se gana y puede ser cuando se recibe en ese momento. Eso es base al tiempo, ¿verdad? Entonces, los gastos también se puede hacer cuando se incurre y cuando se paga. Pero ahora cuando ves que hay cambios en su compañía, entonces vas a tener que adaptarse y hacer el principio de coincidencia. Entonces, cambia a cuando se acumula su devengo y después no se aplica cuando estás haciendo el base de efectivo. Entonces, hay un cambio en ese momento. Y el sistema de GAP, que estaba hablando ahorita el señor Shiveley, en español se dice los principios contables generalmente aceptados, son las normas y convenciones utilizadas aquí en los Estados Unidos para conseguir uniformidad de los estados contables y financieros. El GAP aprueba el devengo y no el criterio de caja. Es el método de contabilidad. Entonces, cuando su negocio crece, entonces usted va a tener que usar el GAP para poder manejar su sistema de cómo se puede mover ese dinero en su cuenta. Y él usó, por ejemplo, si su negocio es pequeño, ahorita pues estás comprando y gastando al mismo tiempo, pero si usted está en una compañía más grande, usted tiene que gastar el dinero y esperarse para poder poner eso en su libro de cuenta hasta que usted lo vende y cómo lo vende. Entonces, eso es una manera que es diferente de eso. Y esto es cuando se podrá cambiar su compañía de público a privado. Y eso se tiene que hablar como, como se dice en inglés, stock market, ¿verdad? Y el proceso es de diferentes etapas de madurez de su compañía y cómo usted va a hablar con el gobierno depende en esto, ¿verdad? Y el señor mencionó, por ejemplo, el SEC, y esta es una parte como del gobierno que se llama el Securities and Exchange Commission, y ellos van a tener que auditar y ver sus libros y saber cómo trabaja su negocio entre ese sistema, porque estás hablando con el público y ellos están tomando en cuenta y tomando parte de su compañía, comprando esos, como en el stock market, están comprando, ni sé cómo se dice en inglés. Can you explain a little bit about the stock exchange piece, Mr. Shiveley?
Yes.
Company.
Yes. So, as I recall, the portion that you're just talking about, and I was trying to follow along, was that when a company is required to use accrual basis compared to cash basis, and companies that are publicly traded on the stock exchange that are having to file their financial statements with the SEC are required to use accrual basis accounting because that is the basis of accounting that is allowed under generally accepted accounting principles, or GAAP. And the stock exchange, when you're publicly listed, you're required to file both quarterly and annual financial statements that are prepared on that basis. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think so. Let me see if I can translate all that. So, entonces, cuando entras y su compañía es público, entonces eso entras como en el stock market, ¿verdad? Y la gente, usted cambia su sistema al devengo para poder ver cómo usted tiene que reportar su información. En vez de cada año, lo vas a tener que hacer cada 3 meses y vas a ver que hay esos cambios con su reporte y sus normas y estándares entre el gobierno. Vas a tener más regulaciones y reglas con el gobierno y estándares que usted tiene que aplicar. Entonces, eso es muy importante que tienes que ver cuando estás cambiando su compañía. En esa manera, en bolsa, ¿verdad? Ok, next page. Next slide. Ok, estados financieros. Entonces, esto muchos pienso que reconocen esto, ¿verdad? Es algo que hasta que yo casi entiendo en este momento. Entonces, los estados financieros también, se puede hacer, estos informes financieros, es un reflejo de la contabilidad de una empresa y muestran la estructura económica de su compañía. Entonces, muchas veces esto se utiliza de cómo ver todo lo que es la actividad de finanzas que está participando en su negocio. Entonces, los componentes de este estado financiero primero es el balance de situación. Entonces, esto es otra vez, hablamos de cómo el documento es contable que informa acerca de la situación de la empresa, presentando sus derechos y obligaciones, así como su capital y reservas valorados de acuerdo a los criterios de contabilidad generalmente aceptados. Entonces vas a ver que su cuenta balance tiene algo que se llama activo, y eso es el dinero en efectivo, el dinero que usted tiene depositado en el banco, o también mencionado anteriormente como sus bienes. También tiene pasivo, esos son tus deudas de la empresa o con bancos, proveedores y otras entidades financieras. Entonces, si usted tiene como alguien que le debes dinero, ¿verdad? El patrimonio neto, las aportaciones realizadas por los socios y beneficios que ha generado la empresa. También vas a ver que hay el cuenta de resultados. Esto es comparar los ingresos de la empresa con los costes de la misma, si ha habido beneficios para pagar dividendos. Dentro de esta tenemos dos elementos. Los ingresos son las entradas de recursos o eliminación de obligaciones que generan incrementos de patrimonio, y los gastos, las salidas de recursos que disminuyen el activo o incrementos del pasivo. Y también eso vamos a hablar del estado de cambios en el patrimonio neto. Esto muestra las variaciones en las entradas y salidas de las operaciones de la empresa en el inicio del periodo, al final del mismo, generalmente en un año, pero como hablamos anteriormente, podrá cambiar dependiendo en su negocio. Y también vas a ver el estado de flujos de efectivo, ¿verdad? Can you change the page, please? Entonces, aquí es donde vemos el estado de flujos de efectivo y muestra las fuentes, regularidad y uso efectivo de la empresa usando estimaciones directas o indirectas. Esta estimación directa muestra el efectivo neto generado por las operaciones para mantener su negocio. Esto cambia y es de importancia para analizar la situación de la empresa y también a reflejar su liquidez. Esto es como ver cómo su salud financiera de su negocio. Okay.
Vanessa.
Miss anything?
No. So, en este momento, la información que estás presentando es realidad, es el estado de su financiar, ¿verdad? Pero lo que estoy notando, y también lo que los informó James, es que cuando estás notando la presentación, el statement que está enfrente de ustedes, es dos tipos de documentos. El primero es el balance sheet y el segundo es el statement of cash flow.
Es
Y
cierto.
todavía sigue un tercer documento donde tienen todas las notas y todos los documentos también. Pero lo que se tiene que notar uno es entender que hay diferentes, ¿cómo se dice? Statements que uno tiene que recordar y documentar. Al principio presentamos el balance sheet, ahora es el statement de cash flow y el final es las notas para poder presentar todas las cuentas que están viendo enfrente de ustedes en este momento. ¿Y qué dijo también el señor James de esas notas, Vanessa?
Y nos dice que él tiene una lista que presenta a sus clientes para prepararse y organizarse. Y en esas notas, él dice que es como 10 páginas y es el resumen. Para él podrá ser, pues, no sé cuántas páginas, yo me imagino cientos de páginas porque yo he estado leyendo mucho de los ingresos y los impuestos, pero dice que él hace un resumen para que una discusión, para hablar con su cliente, para hablar con el negocio, para que entiendan cómo esos flujos de efectivo y cómo su balance está trabajando para su negocio.
Claro. Pero vamos a también, ¿qué se resume, qué es lo más importante con estas concepciones de entender sus cuentas? ¿En qué los vamos a enfocar, que es más importante?
Es cierto. Can you change the slide, please, Miss Sabrina? Y estos conceptos son muy importantes para ustedes para entender y comprender su negocio, sus operaciones a lo largo del tiempo, viendo todo lo que usted está haciendo para tener un negocio que va a existir no solamente hoy, pero viendo al futuro, ¿verdad? Y también algo que es muy, muy importante que habló el señor Shiveley es tienes que comunicarte con muchas personas, con contadores, con banqueros, con presentamistas, con inversionistas, con socios, con todo el mundo estás comunicando sus finanzas. Entonces es muy importante tener eso organizado para poder hablar muy bien de su negocio y últimamente es algo que usted tiene que invertir en su hogar y el mantenimiento para ahorrarse el tiempo y organizarse para tener esos sistemas para sus profesionales y permitir para que usted podrá responder mejor a estas situaciones y oportunidades comerciales que podrán pasar, como por ejemplo el COVID, ¿verdad? Entonces, si usted tiene este sistema y este plan, usted puede ver, cómo necesito hacer estos cambios. El señor Shiveley mencionó el programa Shark Tank, y el señor que está ahí, el señor Kevin O'Leary, que lo llaman señor Maravilla o Mr. Wonderful, y que él es alguien que es como, por ejemplo, ataca o habla, que pregunta mucho de lo que estás vendiendo, lo que estás ganando y sus ingresos y todo eso, ¿verdad? Y dijo el señor Shiveley que si le gusta lo que está diciendo, es muy positivo, ¿verdad? Le gusta su negocio, quiere invertir en su negocio, pero al contrario, si no le gusta lo que estás diciendo, hace su vida difícil, ¿verdad? Y dice, pues este es un programa de televisión, pero esto pasa en la vida real, no tan exagerado, pero si a alguien no le gusta lo que estás presentando y estás haciendo algo con el gobierno o una auditoría, es algo muy negativo para usted, ¿verdad? Porque no vas a recibir ese dinero o vas a tener esos problemas.
Pero yo digo, por la razón que uno se molesta, porque cuando se presenta y están recibiendo información negativas, es porque no tienen sus sistemas en listas, ¿verdad? Pero también, Vanessa, ya vamos al final del año. Estamos preparándolos para las encuestas al final de año.
Todo
¿Qué?
esto es para
¿Verdad?
prepararnos, ¿verdad?
Claro.
Next slide, please. El final del año y, por ejemplo, no me gusta decir que yo me espero hasta el final del año, espero que ustedes hacen mejor que yo en sus negocios que en mi vida personal. Pero esto vamos a comprender cómo sus decisiones van a afectar esto y cómo todo lo que hablamos anteriormente es para prepararse por estos reportes, ¿verdad? Next slide, please.
Claro.
Entonces, el cierre contable, esto es un resumen de cómo se puede hacer, ¿verdad? Entonces, tienes que, antes de cerrar su cuenta, tienes que procesar sus transacciones de cierre, sus nómina, ventas, todos esos, lo que has ganado, lo que no has ganado. Preparar los formularios y plantillas de informes y acuérdate que tiene usted que investigar lo que es lo que usted va a necesitar para su negocio, porque cada negocio es diferente. Se me olvidó mencionar que este horario nos mencionó es el horario del señor Shiveley, ¿verdad? Él dice que puede pasar en 5 días. Algunos dicen, no lo puedo creer que puedo cerrar mi cuenta en 5 días, pero si usted ha organizado todo, si usted ha tomado todo en cuenta y entender su compañía, se puede hacer en 5 días. Pero él ha dicho que él ha tenido clientes que se ha tomado 7 meses para poder cerrar sus libros. Entonces, usted tiene que pensar cómo yo quiero organizarme, y una cosa que mencionó es si usted no tiene todo esto preparado y se tarda en cerrar sus libros 7 meses después, usted puede perder negocio, ¿verdad? En inglés se dice un contrato, ¿verdad? Él tuvo un ejemplo de un cliente en construcción que perdió ese contrato porque no no cerró esos libros. Y entonces, ¿cómo se hace? Se hace con el pre-cierre, procesando todo eso en días 1 a 3 o meses 1 a 3, si usted no tiene todo organizado. Tienes que realizar esas conciliaciones de cuenta, por ejemplo, hablar con su banco para hacer su conciliación bancaria, revisar y cancelar o reservar el ARAP envejecido, registrar su depreciación y otras entradas recurrentes, realice los ajustes necesarios en el diario y prepare el balance de comprobación. Y al final, días 3 a 5, vas a preparar los borradores de estados financieros, revisar por parte de la gerencia para comprender la información comercial oportuna y cierre suave, y publique cualquier ajuste final, cierre cuentas para preparar los estados financieros finales. Entonces, esto es cómo se hace bien, ¿verdad? Pero muchas veces hay un problema bien grande y eso es que no se mantuvo la contabilidad entre el año, entonces se retrasa su capacidad para cerrar los libros, como mencioné, hasta meses después de lo que debía haber sido su periodo fiscal. Entonces, sin cerrar los libros y sin poder producir esa información financiera, ¿cómo sabes dónde se encuentra su negocio? Entonces, realmente creo que tenemos que pensar en tener esos resultados positivos para sus pequeñas empresas y hacer lo que se necesita hacer para mantener esos libros y no tener esos problemas como por ejemplo con su flujo de efectivo, ¿verdad?
¿Qué fue el ejemplo que Mr. Shiveley usó que que se debe reconocer sus cuentas con su banquera o banquero. Recomendó que tantas veces deben comunicarse con su banco.
No me acuerdo del número. Le puedo preguntar al señor Shiveley.
Reconcile, I think it was, he said the reconciliations. When should how often should they reconcile? Mr. Shiveley, I believe you recommended, realistically, you said monthly?
Monthly?
Yeah, my opinion was once per month,
Okay.
but understanding that every company is different and that for maybe smaller or less complex companies, that could be quarterly or yearly, but my general recommendation is once per month.
Awesome.
Right.
Entonces, él ha hablado de cómo, ¿verdad? Entonces, yo siempre digo, a mí me gusta tener horario para todo, ¿verdad? Cuando me despierto, cuando me duermo, pero también hay un horario para esto, ¿verdad? Entonces, ¿cómo usted debe hacer esta reconciliación bancaria? Es cada mes, es el punto de vista del señor Shiveley en muchas ocasiones, pero cada negocio es diferente. Entonces, habla con su banco. Eso es algo tan importante que tienes que comunicarse con su banco y entender lo que usted tiene que hacer y cuándo lo tiene que hacer para tener esa relación con su banco y quedar bien en sus reportes y mantener su negocio. Y también mencionó algo que en compañías de manufactura que ven, si usted tiene como por ejemplo compras mercancía y ya no lo puedes vender y es algo que ya no se usa, es algo también que usted tiene que tomar en cuenta y lo llamó el E&O. Y el señor Shiveley nos va a explicar lo que es el E&O porque yo no entiendo lo que es el E&O. Mr. Shiveley, could you tell me what an E&O is for the manufacturing companies?
Yes, of course. E&O stands for excess and obsolete. It is a reserve or write-off that is performed at the end of a period for companies that have inventory that they either no longer believe they will be able to sell or no longer believe they will be able to sell for its full value.
Okay.
So just to make sure before I say anything, so when they can report it and get a tax, like maybe a tax write-off when it is.
Yes, it becomes an expense of the company that reduces their net income, so therefore it reduces the tax that they owe by the tax rate of that write-off.
Oh, awesome.
Is it the value of the item, or is it based on the item?
It's based on their estimation of whether or not they will be able to sell that item at all, and if they believe they will be able to sell it, but for a reduced value, the reduction in value from what they are carrying it on their books.
So the reduced value is what is written off.
Yes, exactly.
Awesome. Ok, entonces esto en el E es como exceso y el O es algo que como antiguo que ya no se usa, obsolete. Y si usted tiene como una fábrica, una compañía que tienes algo que ya no se puede usar, usted puede reportar esa
Por
cosa.
ejemplo, vamos a hacer que es un motor y no se va a poder utilizar, ¿verdad? Y no miran la manera que lo van a utilizar. Van a, ¿cómo se dice? Presentar el valor de ese motor y como no se va a utilizar, lo van a inscribir en sus impuestos, que el valor que está presentado en la cuenta, entre el valor real, que es el del motor,
Sí.
¿verdad?
Y sí, si por ejemplo, como el motor, si lo compró por 2,000 y ahora es 1,000, y ya no se puede usar. Usted puede poner el 1,000 en sus libros, en sus impuestos, como un gasto, y entonces se dice en inglés un write-off, ¿verdad? Y puede tomar eso en cuenta y no vas a tener tanto impuesto en esa mercancía, como el motor, por ejemplo, el motor. Awesome. Okay, change the slide, please. Entonces, es el cierre contable. Hay actividades clave que usted tiene que hacer, y esto es para obtener el resultado deseado para mantener el plazo para el cierre. En ese momento es habitualmente el 31 de diciembre, y este proceso tiene muchas fases, ¿verdad? Entonces, lo primero es tienes que cerrar el AR y AP. Incluye el registro de facturas y facturas en el periodo apropiado y acumulación de estimaciones para los gastos materiales incurridos. La conciliación bancaria es importante para garantizar que se haya contabilizado toda la actividad y que tenga un conocimiento sólido de los elementos pendientes. Se requieren varios asientos de diario de cierre para establecer de manera justa de finanzas, incluidas las reservas, como AR, y como hablamos ahorita, el E&O, depreciación, entre otros que son muy comunes, y el supervisión mensual y trimestral de un profesional financiero para detectar problemas con anticipación, ¿verdad? A mí no me gustan sorpresas, ¿verdad? Entonces es importante tomar en cuenta, hablar con alguien para repasar esa información, para que usted no tendrá problemas. Entonces le voy a preguntar algo al señor, no va a ser el otro página, ok. Entonces,
Vanessa,
todo,
¿sabes qué?
Sí.
Perdón, despierta que te estoy interrumpiendo, pero ya estamos llegando al final de nuestro tiempo y queremos presentar la información si acaso hay una pregunta, porque la información que el señor Shiveley que está presentando es muy importante para poder entender nuestros impuestos. Pero como siempre, buena información es tan importante de dedicarse a entender cada palabra y cada actividad. Pero en este momento quiero hablarle, a tomar provecho que tenemos del señor Shiveley. Si hay en este momento una pregunta que alguien quiera presentarlos, por favor, aprovechen en este momento que tenemos el señor Shiveley también. Pero como estabas diciendo tú, Vanessa, hubo una pregunta en inglés que queremos asegurar que podemos presentar. Y eso fue, vamos a ver, ahorita con COVID, porque hay una oportunidad donde pueden tener la oficina del gobierno con negocios, con los que tienen empresas en este momento, pueden reclamar el Home Office Deduction para el 2020 año, ¿verdad? Y la respuesta fue de Mr. Shiveley que sí se puede, pero en este momento que fue, parece que Mr. Shiveley, one of the questions that we had in English, because we're getting ready to conclude and I don't want to take any more time as we're moving forward, was the question in English was, due to COVID and working from home, as it was ordered by the governor's office, homeowners are able to claim the home office deduction for 2020. And what was the response on that one, sir?
You are allowed to take a home office deduction if you are using your home for business purposes. The home office deduction has not been changed this year that I'm aware of. So it's the proportion of your home expenses that apply to the conduct of your business in your home. I also caution that it is a higher risk deduction for flagging your return for a review or audit by the IRS in their system. So just to prepare and retain your records for how you took that deduction so that if it does get inspected, that you're able to support the position that you're taking.
Entonces el señor Shiveley mencionó que sí se puede tomar esa deducción para su casa si usted está trabajando, pero esto es un riesgo muy alto, entonces es como una banderita que dice que el gobierno o el servicio de impuestos internos va a decir, pues voy a investigar esto, entonces es muy importante mantener cómo lo estás usando y por qué. Y también entender si no se puede usar como 100% de su casa. Si estás usando, por ejemplo, una habitación en su casa, debe ser un porcentaje de eso.
Señor Shiveley, gracias por la oportunidad de estar presentado en toda la información que nos presentó, porque en este momento que estamos cambiando y tenemos exámenes de nuestro negocio, es importante entender las impuestos. So, gracias a su compañía, gracias a su profesión y por su tiempo, señor Shiveley. Y Vanessa, gracias como siempre para apoyarlos a poder presentar la información en español.
Gracias, señora Maritano. Mucho gusto de estar aquí y a tratar de ayudar a entender todo esto.
Muy bien hecho, bravo, bravo. Pero como siempre, aquí no nomás estamos aquí para presentar la información, pero también estamos aquí para apoyar. Y la manera que apoyamos es le estamos pidiendo que se inscriben con Buy Local Grow SA. Y si los hace un momento, vamos a presentar la información sobre Buy Local Grow SA. Can we go to that slide, please? Aquí está la información. Quiero también otra vez informarles sobre Buy Local Grow SA. Es un sitio de web único de recursos para pequeñas empresas. Toma la oportunidad a registrarse. Si miran en la esquinita donde está el QR code, tomen su teléfono con su cámara y donde lo ponen sobre el QR code se pueden registrar directo. No nomás está la información en inglés, pero también está en español. Les toman como unos 5 minutos para poder registrarse y cuando reciben la prueba van a desbloquear información que pueden hacer negocios aquí con San Antonio. Gracias como siempre. Si pueden registrarse y seguir viendo oportunidades y recursos. Pero como siempre también, no nomás estamos aquí para registrarse, para apoyar, pero como siempre, ¿quién son los patronizones que siempre los apoya? Pero como HEB. Y HEB está presentando una oportunidad otra vez en 2020, HEB Oportunidad Exchange, como hacer negocio con HEB. Se van a presentar el 28 de septiembre. Regístrense, por favor. Donde está el link enfrente de ustedes. Va a ser de 8:30 a las 2 de la tarde. Pero cuando le mandan el link, por favor, no comparecen ese link porque es solamente para a las empresas que se registran. Otra vez es otra manera de hacer negocio con HEB. Y como siempre, ellos están aquí para apoyarlos. También les están presentando otra oportunidad. Otra oportunidad que está HEB es un video expo. Now, HEB, cuando están presentando la oportunidad del exchange, que están pidiendo que si tienen la oportunidad a presentarse un video expo. Now, tienen que grabar un video de 90 segundos. No puede ser de YouTube, ¿verdad? 90 segundos y lo que están pidiendo es que pongan su nombre de su empresa, información sobre su producto o su servicio, donde se puede encontrar su producto, como el sitio web, o también si tienen un mercado, información de su contacto. Pero cuando se envía la información, vayan a suppliersdiversity@heb.com. Now, hoy es el día final que se pueden registrar, el 23 de septiembre. Pero toma la oportunidad de poner su título en el correo electrónico de oportunidad, Opportunity Exchange en Expo 2020. Van a presentar su nombre de su empresa y el nombre de su producto. Regístrense aquí con Buy Local Grow SA. Regístrense y presenten su video y tomen la oportunidad a cómo hacer negocio con HEB porque ellos están aquí para apoyarlos y como siempre para poder avanzar. Quien también, como están presentando el webinar, es el Maestro Entrepreneur Center. La información está aquí sobre el Maestro Center. Queremos ustedes que tomen la oportunidad de hacer una cita con nosotros para poder aprovechar a ver cómo está el edificio. Hay diferentes maneras que pueden usar el espacio de oficina que sea presentarse lo que ustedes pueden usar. Pero si acaso no pudieron presentarse, síguenos a nosotros con Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Y como siempre tienen sus empresas profesionales, síguenos también en LinkedIn con Maestro Entrepreneur Center. También tenemos YouTube. Y como se estamos presentando, si por una razón u otra no pudieran estar aquí con live on Facebook o el webinar, también tenemos podcast. Porque sabemos que su tiempo es muy importante. Tienen clientes y tienen trabajo que tienen a soportar. Pero también tenemos los podcasts porque si acaso están manejando a ir a ver a su banquero o van a hacer trabajo por uno de sus clientes y no tuvieron la oportunidad de escucharlos en el webinar, búsquenlos en el podcast porque aquí estamos a apoyarles a todos. Y como siempre, pues no nomás apoyar a los que están presentados en el webinar, pero también apoyar a las empresas que siguen buscando a poder avanzar. Gracias a ustedes por estar presentados, pero también gracias a nuestros patrocinadores que ayudan a hacer todo posible. H-E-B, Wells Fargo, la ciudad de San Antonio, el Departamento de Desarrollo, a Wells Fargo, y como siempre, si están notando las cooperaciones que los apoyan. Gracias a todos y aquí estamos para asistir, y si quieren notar la información de este webinar, se inscriben en mari@maestrocenter.org para poder recibir información y seguir avanzando. Cada miércoles estamos aquí y los vemos el próximo miércoles. Gracias a todos.